Mm-hmm.
It's like maybe you're bypassing the very fundamental thing that you need to do to grow to enable that waking up experience to happen in a better way.
Yeah, maybe you need to clean up your bedroom and take a shower.
Yes. And that's what I think a lot of, I know I need to do that in my life a lot more.
I mean, respectfully.
Well,
Thank you, Christian. I need to go do that next. Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We once again have Christian Rivera back with us on the show. Welcome, Christian.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, as a guest host this week. We've been doing a short series that you brought to us, talking a little bit through Ken Wilber's framework at the Integral Institute with its grow up, wake up, clean up, show up framework. We've been walking through this. And this week, we're going to attune our attention to the wake up portion of this. We kind of left everyone on a cliffhanger, like, what does wake up mean? I think I just will start off by retelling the story I told on the last episode during the grow up portion, as we were trying to find access points for growing up in our life. And we're also going to relate this to personality types. So if you're a brand new listener, don't worry, we'll get you some information about personality types too. But we're coming from this framework of how do we apply personality types to our lives? How do we use it to grow ourselves? How do we use it to improve our circumstances? How do we use it to get the outcome we want in life, or just to attune to the self more? So as we're walking through this process, we're now at this wake up period. I told this story last week about the grow up axis in my life. We're at our live event for our Personality Life Path program, and we were in the middle of coaching. A lot of coaching is, people sitting in chairs around a table, talking about their issue, working on their personality type, and what comes up for them. And we're trying to find different aspects of how they can grow in their life. And we're doing work. And there were two moments during the weekend when it was very clear that a conversation was not working. Like it was too intellectual. It was too cerebral. I had this moment, this instinctual gut level moment of, I need to coach with more physicality. I need to coach with more energy, with more emotion. This isn't a conversation we need to have. So we actually, two of the individuals, we got up and I brought them into the middle of the circle and we started doing actual like physical work, vocalizations, performative work, tuning into emotions, role playing with like child-parent dynamics, all these elements. We wove an entire experience together for them. And it was quite profound for me because I know I have this in me, but it was one of the first times I think we've grown our team to the point where there's a lot of support. So I'm able to show up in this way. And I had this moment where I was like, wow, that was amazing to contribute. But I was exhausted afterward. I was like, wow, that took a lot. And I'm like, wow, that is a gift I have, but I certainly can't sustain that gift without growing up a little around my physicality. Like I need to attune to my body. I need to take care of it, make sure I'm almost like training like an athlete. If I'm going to do some of this high level output work with people and the way I can contribute to the world, it can't just be in my mind. I've got to bring this into my body, my voice, my body, my whole physical presence, my energy, my attitude, my attunement to what kind of, if I'm negative or positive in that moment, like all these things need to be woven into it. And so last week I said that on the episode, I was talking about this idea of growing up. I'm like, I was a really profound moment where I think I need to grow up in the physical space. I think I've got a lot of emotional maturity. I've got even some intellectual maturity, but the physical maturity, and I think it's because I've had an easy time of it. My body just responds well. I haven't had to like take care of it and it just shows up for me. So I've taken it for granted.
Right.
But I had this moment, and I think that's what we want to talk about today. It was that moment of awakening to the idea. The growth work is going to happen over time, but there's that key moment. We talked last week about there was pressure on me to perform. That's what gave me this opportunity to see this. I had an awakening to the fact that I need to, if I want to contribute this way, I've got to get serious about what I need to do with my physical health.
Right.
So that's what we want to talk about today, that moment or those moments in our lives when we get a new enlightened viewpoint. It's like a level up moment. We're like, oh, I see what's happening. And we want to unpack what that might look like and talk about some access points, maybe from a personality type standpoint.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting about this idea of waking up, there's a lot of different avenues we can approach waking up from, but from your example and your story, it's to stem from what we talked about in the growing up episode last week. You were ready for that. And there was you were ready for that in terms of what you've been thinking about, the people you've surrounded yourself with, the circumstance you were in. And it was this moment of opportunity, almost like this portal opened up and you jumped through it. And you're like, okay, this is a moment when I could try this. And you said like feeling exhausted afterward. I resonate with that because most recently I put on what's called a mental wellness open mic night. And it was this moment that I know I've been thinking about being ready for doing more of an MC hosting kind of thing. Like ever since I was a kid, I had this instinct that I wanted to be some sort of on stage doing something. I always felt very connected to being a creative person and wanting to perform in some way, but I didn't feel connected to like traditional actors or anything like that. And over the course of my life, I've been able to develop skills of speaking, of connecting, of, explaining ideas in a way that's accessible, and working on my vocal tonality and things like that. And got to this circumstance where there was enough pressure created in my life to be able to put myself in a position where it's like, okay, let me try this. And I did the open mic night, which was great. It was successful. It was so much fun. I was able to push through, but man, was I exhausted afterwards, because it's not necessarily where I live all the time. It's not where I'm comfortable all the time. It's not what I'm doing regularly. So in your circumstance, it's like, that's not what we showed up to do, but an opportunity to do that opened up and pushed your capacity to the next level. You were able to kind of wake up to this capacity that you have, a new limit, like pushing past a limitation that maybe you thought you had up until that point. That maybe you cognitively ruminated on it, or you thought about it or fantasized about it, but then actually in an embodied way, you got to step in.
I think that's really important because I have been intellectualizing it and thinking about it. I've seen other people do it, and I've dabbled very low level with it, just like little tastes of it. I've never gone full in like I did this last experience. But it was something I'd been ruminating on, but it wasn't until I had the experience of actually stepping in to try something, not just thinking about it or hoping for it, but stepping in and actually doing it. That's what awakened me to it. Like I couldn't have seen it had I not had the experience of kind of feeling exhausted and feeling so good about the contribution, but also feeling, whoa, I need to really work to make sure I can sustain that. That experience was so powerful. And I'm wondering if experience is so important for our waking up. Like there's this pressure, or there's this moment. It's almost like I don't think we just go through life. We're just driving down the road one day and all of a sudden we have like, we might like the Damascene moment, like, oh, I see it all now. I see what I need to awaken to, or whatever I need to go toward. It's almost like it is that real experience. Is that resonating with the two of you? Or?
Yeah, it's kind of like an emergence moment. Like you can't have that driving down the street and there's something you've been thinking about for a long time, and something you've been ruminating on, and something just kind of clicks in your mind. And I had that. I had that moment. I was actually driving down to see you guys. I think towards December of 2018, I was driving in my car. My wife and I were very much talking about personality types and very much involved in this world, talking about our mental health experiences, talking about essentially sharing stories of our growing up experience, of all the pressures we faced, how we conquered them, those kinds of things. And I just had this moment where there was this moment of like, hi there, like in my mind, like I was able to almost become more regularly lucid to my growing up experience. So we talked about in the last podcast also this idea that growing up intentionally is this moment of taking the unconscious growing up process and making it more conscious. And it's through a series of waking up processes, like peak moments or peak experiences, that we can start to do that more regularly. And that could be having moments of witnessing yourself doing something over and over again. I hear stories from people in their 20s that are younger than me that have these moments of recognizing that, like, I don't clean my room. I don't know why. It's just not something I do. I don't care. I kind of know it's a problem, but I don't really do anything about it. I just kind of watch myself do it. And you start to have these moments of being able to watch yourself do these things. And in that moment with you, Joel, I'm sure you like had this moment of like watching yourself, like, I'm doing it. It's like a toddler learning how to walk and you're like, I'm doing it. Like that's a toddler's peak experience, is like walking for the first time. And you're like, I'm doing it. Right. And you have this almost temporary out of body, like watching yourself do it. Right. And and it can happen from performance. It can happen from performance over and over again. And then at some point it just kind of becomes a part of your experience. And so it's like you wake up to it and then you kind of stay awake.
So we're talking about, when we say waking up, the contemporary vernacular around this is usually waking up to social conditions or waking up to injustices or waking up to the environment. But what we're talking about here in Ken Wilber's model, or you could just call it almost like a mantra. We're talking about actually waking up to the self and having heightened self-awareness and the capacity to not just take an action, but watch yourself take an action. And then there are times when you watch yourself take an action and now it's not the same as it was the last time you watched, right? It's like waking up to potential. It's waking up to what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing. And when you do that, there's, they always say that awareness is the first step. You're waking up is tapping into that first step of awareness.
Yeah, I think it's actually both. I think it's inner and outer. I think it's developing an awareness of, like, there might be a circumstance where you start to move past your religion and suddenly you start to get to know, what's the word people are using? Like this dissecting, this distancing from your religion. Deconstructing. You're deconstructing from your religious relationship. And through that deconstruction, you're starting to notice how religions maybe have impacted societies and things like that. But then through that, you start to witness how you have had a connection and impact to, the world around you or people around you and things like that. So it's kind of this push-pull of like, I'm doing some inner awareness. And then by then I kind of expand my outer awareness. It's like, I can see more territory. Literally, I can move into new territory and be maybe more open and willing to travel, for example, because my mental space is a little bit more open and less afraid of certain confines. Like I don't have to stay within the people I know. I can be willing and if anything, more curious about other people's experiences and going towards that. So I hope that expands on what you're saying and doesn't counteract it.
No, I'm glad that you mentioned it, because I think I agree. I think waking up can include taking in more territory and observing what's going on in a bigger landscape. I think the reason why I created that contrast is because it doesn't do much good unless you're also waking up to the self. Right. And so if you're only waking up, like we use it almost exclusively in terms of waking up to your environment. And I think that has a very quick law of diminishing returns if you're not also waking up to the self. And not just one's relationship to all the things you're observing in the outside world, but your relationship to your own developmental process. So I'm glad you clarified that, because I think it is both. It's just one without the other is flaccid.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're only noticing the outside world things and you're ignoring the inside world things, then that becomes a breeding ground for projections.
Yes.
Everything is someone else's fault, or the system's fault, or society's fault, or, men's fault, or women's fault, or, this community's fault, this person's fault, whatever. It's just the blame fest because you're not.
But mostly men, right?
But mostly.
Hey, wait a minute.
Hey.
We all know how much we can put on the broads, so it's going to be fine.
That's fine. I can take the hit. But that kind of speaks to that. There's a quote that I pulled here from Alan Watts that says, if you're going to wake up, you'll wake up. If you're not ready, then you'll keep going on as poor little me. Right. And it's just like blaming. Everything's happening to me. And it's like turning the lens over from everything happening to you to now I'm an active participant in the world. And I can start to actually facilitate and begin to navigate towards wake up experiences, which has its own pitfalls and stuff. But there's something you were about to say too.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that you can tell how far down the road we are on this blaming everybody else thing, because like the joke I made is it falls flat. I'm like, but it's mostly men, right? And it falls flat because we're in a time period where it's like, no, I might legitimately believe that. Right. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like my camp and it's other people in the other camp and they're the problem. And so I can't make that joke like I could have like 15 years ago where it would have been funny. It's like, no, she might actually mean that. And then I go, it's the broads too. Right. And then I'm like, oh, that's also uncomfortable because is Antonia allowed to call women broads? And she's going to get a bunch of emails. And it's like, so we're in a climate right now where we do a lot of the projecting. And so I think this might be an easier concept to dial or to kind of understand, but I think it's a really important one because as you mentioned, if you're only waking up to outside environmental considerations, you're probably doing a ton of projecting. I would imagine if you're only waking up to yourself, does that also create a breeding ground of introjection where it's like, I'm always at fault. It's always me. I'm always the problem.
Yeah. You're taking on everyone else's emotions or you're overvaluing your own experience as like, I'm the one at fault.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to get that into that, I think, in more detail when we get to the cleanup part,
Yeah.
As we get through this. But the waking up experience is so interesting in the sense that, there are a couple different avenues to get to a waking up experience. Once people start hearing about the idea of waking up, it kind of translates in a couple different ways. I think people think about waking up as like, again, you're talking about kind of social activism or certain ways that the world are operating. It's like, we need to wake people up that religions are ruining this, or we need to wake people up to like this war is happening in this part of the world.
Or this political party.
We need to make people, what we're really saying is making people conscious. But
well, even more than that, we're saying make people aware and make sure they see it my way.
Right.
See the values that I would have for it.
Right.
I mean, I really see the values more than I see just alerting people. Like we all know there's wars and conflict and all that. They're saying you need to have the right view of it. That's what we mean by waking up. You've got to put the right lens on your life to see this appropriately with my values.
And I think the desire to want to get others to see things the way that I see them, or to awaken to a certain experience, is that waking up is both exciting, but also can be incredibly lonely.
Oh, yeah.
Because especially when you wake up to a new level or new experience or new area of development or new awareness, it's suddenly the instant question is like, who else knows this? Who else experienced this? Who else is in this with me? And the desire is to take the people who were just with you forward with you. It's like, I need to wake them up to be with me going forward into whatever the next experience is. So for example, if suddenly with your wake up experience to this like kinesthetic idea of wanting to do more embodied support, and if that ends up undermining like personality hacker, for example, and you want to go a completely different direction, let's say theoretically, and you're like, actually, this is a new thing. And what we've been doing this whole time is not what I want to do anymore. So the whole team needs to come with me. We need to do this new thing. But then the team doesn't want to go there. So what does that mean? It means you're now alone in this desire. You're now alone in wanting to go forward in this new territory. So that creates anxiety to get people to wake up with you, which can sometimes be like a weaponizing of waking up in a way.
That's a great point.
And I want to come back to personality type. I mean, you're probably listening right now or watching right now. You have awoken to personality types. This idea of a framework that makes you understand, oh, that's how I'm wired. That's my experience. And you might even know the people around you, like your parents and siblings and friends and family and career coworkers, et cetera. And you're like, oh, all we have to do is get everybody aware of their personality types. Why doesn't anyone want to know? This is so profound. It's changed so much for me. And your attempt is to explain and convince and drag everybody you know into this understanding of personality type. And you can't understand why they're not interested. And you're like, I wish I could maybe I got to explain it better. That's what it is.
Right.
Maybe I need to show how it's used better. Maybe I need to convince them of something, whatever, fill in the blank of what you might think. But I think a lot of people have this experience with type itself. Right. Like they're awoken to something. They wake up to something that's very profound for them and they're like frustrated.
Yeah. And usually moving into personality types denotes kind of a level change. I mean, we talked about varying levels of development, different systems in the last podcast about growing up. And that might come with a different way of seeing the world. And again, because you're walking into a new territory, it's like, who is here with me? I don't want to be with these strangers. I want to bring the people I already know with me. Right. So that becomes that can create a lot of fear, some trepidation around not only going into new territory with new people, but maybe trying to bring old ways of thinking into this new territory as well. That mismatch, right? It's like if you're used to having debates to understand the way the world works, and this new way is about personally exploring and rationalizing how the material world works and diving into personality types in terms of its content, in terms of actually truly understanding and having a relationship with people with it and bringing it alive into the actual real world, you may resort to what feels more comfortable, which is just arguing about it, or like who has the best book-based material around it, who has the origin source material that's the most valuable, versus like allowing yourself to venture forward into like, where are the leading edges of this? What's the most interesting of this? Where are the other people that are talking about this? How can I connect with people on this material and enter this new level with other people, with a bravery to experience new people and new ideas along with it?
And that's the recipe for a lateral move. Like when, and I hadn't thought about that before, but when you've like sort of woken up and realized that you're ready for the next level, but there's no framework, there's no model, there's no mentor, there's nobody with you. It's like you're there all by yourself and you're really destabilized and uncomfortable. It's really easy to just make a lateral move and stay at the previous level, but have like you're more than that, but you're not quite like moving to the next lily pad.
Right.
And so I think I see people wake up and then make lateral moves, wake up and then make lateral moves. I see that happen a lot. So waking up to make it successful means not just waking up and being aware, but being aware that more is now asked of you. Like you can make a lateral move if you want to, but you'll find yourself just as unsatisfied there as you were in the previous, the previous level that, per the last podcast, you had pressure and you were ready. Right. And so if you had pressure and you were ready and you add awareness to it, now you got to get out of the comfort zone. Now you got to go to the next level.
Right. Start to develop some bravery around it. And that only covers one area of what waking up could be. That's the levels part of it. It's like moving from levels of awareness to different levels of awareness, or different worldviews to different worldviews. But there are temporary states of waking up. It's kind of like your version of that is more of a state. It's like you had this moment of awakening. You had this moment of realizing your potential, in a sense of like, now suddenly all these possibilities probably unlock from that kind of moment. Right. Yeah. And what can be a challenge with temporary states is like, you can get addicted to it from a chemical sense. You can keep chasing the high of a certain experience. If that didn't support something you can continue to do, we can get temporary chemical states from, drugs, from sex addictions, from anything that would chemically move our body's chemicals, because our body, like dopamine in particular, activates just because you did something exciting, you took a risk, and it panned out to some degree. But your body, your dopamine, the literal chemicals don't know that happens because of this, right? So if you have, let's say, social media scrolling and you're just getting dopamine hits all the time and you're getting these mini temporary states, which for me as an introverted thinking person, surfing the type stuff and trying to understand personality types, and as an introverted thinking accuracy person, I get dopamine hits from clarity, from understanding, from greater ability to express or explain something. And that's something that I can do totally on my own, and I can become addicted to that. People can become addicted to understanding psychological material. They become addicted to the hits of clarity. Like, oh, that's how introverted thinking works. That's how this works. That's how that works. And like, those are chemically built-in systems for a reason. You want to have those rewards so you continue to pursue them, but that can also be abused. That can keep you from experiencing wake up states in other areas in the levels. It can keep you from wake up states in bigger picture ways. And it can keep you from developing skills, which create more lines of development or peak experiences in terms of developing our intelligences and our capabilities.
Like getting addicted to the beginning of a relationship.
Yeah.
Right. And so like getting like you only ever want to experience the honeymoon phase. You never want to move into mature love.
Right.
And mature love offers a bunch of growth opportunities that the honeymoon stage never can. So what I hear you saying is that sometimes we can build that relationship with insights and ahas, and for our audience, particularly when it comes to personal growth, ahas and insights, and personality type ahas and insights, you can get kind of locked in that phase because you're addicted to the insights, but it never actually moves into the equivalent of mature love, which is application and what this can do for me.
Well, I think at our profiler training experience, there's a lot of people that come in as type geeks that know a lot about personality type and all that. And they have an awakening moment like, wow. I mean, they join because of this, but then they have that visceral experience at a live event or going through the material. Well, I can have that conversation, help somebody arrive at a best fit type, not just tell them their type because I observe them, but co-create it with them. There's a whole reward system there, and they get awakened to that like, whoa, that's a whole different experience with personality types than what I've been doing by viewing YouTube videos and just projecting type onto people I really don't know, or just interviews that I'm seeing. I'm only seeing a slice of them. I can't ask them questions or calibrate that. And they're awakening to those ideas in our profiler training going, what a superpower, what an amazing ability to connect with other humans. And then humans become more interesting. They're actually able to help people. It opens up the opportunity for coaching or helping, which a lot of people we attract are helpers or coaches or people that contribute. They're advice givers in their world.
Right.
So I think that these awakening moments are so powerful. So where do we go from here? How can we talk more about these awakening moments? Where do we find our access?
Well, I think first of all, before that, I think it's important to be careful also, because state experiences can be a negative. It can be, for example, introverted feeling can get addicted to pain. Like you can get addicted to, right?
Suffering.
You can get addicted to suffering or making someone suffer, like in the most negative way. There's certain Enneagram types that would do that or create sabotage. That would be an exciting thing. Like you could project a fear into the future and unconsciously make it happen, and therefore get the dopamine hit that are like, oh, it happened.
I was right
the whole time. Right. So there's certain ways that we can, maybe get addicted to the negativity of these states. I mean, Hitler created a vision for Germany by having an awakening state during World War I, and saw this big vision of the future and just pursued it because his level of development didn't match the ability to take that state forward in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Right. So these things are in tandem together, being able to grow up. That's why grow up comes first, right? Not in terms of order of operations, but it's something that's the bottom layer of the cake. It's something that we're continually doing. If we're just passively in our room, just scrolling on our phones, clicking on something and not growing and developing as a person, then we can have these awakening experiences for how the world should be without actually experiencing the world itself. Right.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect. And then there's these lines of development and these intelligences that come online also, where, Joel, with your example as well, it was a kinesthetic moment.
Yeah.
It was, and you describe yourself as a kinesthetic person. You like to get into a room, you like to know how it feels, and you like to move your body, and you like to take up space. It's a very much a kinesthetic type of intelligence. And there's multiple kinds of intelligences that we can tap into. And if we reach this sort of peak of that line of experience, examples would be kinesthetic, cognitive intelligence, moral intelligence, emotional, spiritual, aesthetic, musical, or even existential intelligence. And for me, again, with an introverted thinking perspective, it's like greater levels of understanding could continue to push me into those states of being, if that makes sense. So with the personality thing, also with the personality aspects of all of this, it's understanding that our two dominant cognitive functions, for me, it's introverted thinking accuracy, and then extroverted intuition, exploration. When I'm in flow of talking on a podcast like this and explaining something, like this is a consistent state of awakening, of sharing, of talking, of like really being in this consistent. I have these moments all throughout. I kind of have these like mini blackouts almost. It's kind of the only way I could describe it. Yeah. Where like I have this moment where I'm like, I'm podcasting here with Joel and Antonia. This is going really well. Okay, great. I'm still talking. I hope this is interesting. But I feel like I'm in flow. I don't really track what I'm saying exactly. I know I'm going to listen to it later, and it's great because I'm totally in a flow state. There's a certain degree of like trust and faith that I know what I'm doing. And it's developing those skill sets. And so in the case, again, of you in that kinesthetic situation, it's like, there's going to be a point where it's like not exhausting anymore, or it's not as exhausting. It's just like, this is the state I'm in. This is just what I do all the time. This is the air I breathe. This is flow. And I would argue that that brings you into that genius zone, that flow state, those top two cognitive functions for you to bring that extroverted intuition, for you to bring that introverted feeling into that context and really be in your essence and be in your flow of who you are as a person. Yeah.
I also had blackouts. I have a hard time remembering the specifics of that experience. So I think that's another element of flow state. So again, I think if someone's watching or listening here thinking, okay, waking up, again, we all have our own interpretations of that.
Yep.
I would also offer that sometimes waking up isn't about more or expansion. Like sometimes I wake up to the idea like, I don't need all this excess. Like it's a more simple wake. I'm waking up to going, oh, actually I'm waking up to what matters.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily always have to be a waking up to what's possible.
Mm-hmm.
It also could be waking up to priority. Like, oh, this is actually, I thought it was all about this stuff out here, maybe like impressing people or feeling safe or having power in my life or whatever. And then I realized actually at the end of the day, I've woken up to the idea, like it's really about loving the people I'm around, loving myself, attuning to my own existence, showing up for my kids and the people that I need to be, around and surrounded with and supportive of, and carving out a space in the world of the things that matter to me, because I can't do it all. And so I've woken up to this idea that it's not as expansive as I once thought.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the other thing is it's not always bigger and more and more and bigger.
Right.
We always think of waking up like that, like you're seeing more territory, but just because you see more territory doesn't mean you're trying to take in all that territory.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not trying to own it all in a space.
Right.
You know what I'm saying by this? Like what matters?
Right. And it's starting to tune to what continues to enable you to walk the spiritual walk. And again, by spiritual, I mean just like really attuning to yourself and getting to know yourself as a person. What we do in the growing up process, particularly around personality type, is we do a lot of spiritual talk. We do a lot of intellectualizing. We do a lot of understanding, which is great. And that's part of the process. But at some point you have to step into experience. And stepping into experience, like again, with the bravery of having maybe not done that before, has those temporary state experiences. And then over time, that becomes more of a line of development experience where you get to have that more often. You get to experience that more often. You get to be in flow more often. Mm-hmm. And then even like levels of development also enable, in terms of your circumstances or your value set, enable you to access that more often versus like maybe being in a consistently, poverty-stricken situation where you're having to worry about your survival and security needs more often, and not able to be feeling safe and secure.
Is it okay if I
please jump in?
I wasn't sure if you were going to go a different direction, but I had a recent awakening moment that I think is complementary to what you just said, which is I was having a conversation with my brother not that long ago about what unearned status means. And the conversation was interesting because we were talking about social implications of unearned status and how that, creates differentials in power and all that stuff. But afterward, the awareness that I had is, what does it mean to earn something? What is earned and what is unearned? And of course, because I'm a personal growth person, I immediately applied it to growth and development. Like, what does it mean to have earned something? And I had an awareness of my own, especially in the past. I don't think I do it as much now, but I'm sure I still do. And so I'm trying to keep my finger on the pulse of all the areas that I might have done this. But it's like claiming growth that I didn't earn because other people believed I did, allowing other people's opinion of where I'm at to determine where my set point is, as opposed to, did I earn that set point? And what did I have to go through to earn it? And so it helped me, like I see growth as like all these dials, right? Like all these stratified, areas of life. In an overarching way, one could call it, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and physical. But there's lots of more discrete dials underneath those two, under those categories. And I think I sometimes talk as if I have earned something I have not, and I talk as if I didn't earn something that I did. Right? I'm like I'm being falsely modest in some ways, and I'm being falsely what's the word, like like presumptuous or presuming that I have gotten to a place that I actually haven't. And that awareness, that awakening I had, what it gave me wasn't a bump up in my development. What it gave me was like a clarity of where I actually am at. And so it started pointing me in all these different directions of, okay, I think I have claimed ground that I did not earn. And I am not claiming ground I did earn. And when I let myself feel that, experience that, like it was like a embodied, almost a somatic experience, I felt everything get really calm, right? It was like, oh yeah, I'm allowed to say that I'm good at something. Right. I don't have to pretend I'm not, because it might make somebody else uncomfortable that they're not there yet. And I don't have to diminish myself in behalf of other people, because that's actually infantilizing them. that's acting as if they can't handle that people have gotten further than they have in one area.
Right.
And I actually have to very much stop claiming things that I did not earn
Mhm.
because people will give me unearned credits
Right.
because of the things I have accomplished.
Mhm.
So if I claim these things, they're going to buy it because they trust me. So I'm exploiting trust.
Mhm.
And then, I mean, it was just like a massive reframe. And it was just a moment of clarity. It was like a moment of understanding.
Mhm.
And it gave me a really good calibration tool,
Yep.
right? Or at least in my own mind. And so that was a waking up experience that I don't feel leveled me up, but it gave me some tools that helped me level up. I think
Right.
that's what you're kind of talking about to some extent.
Yeah. Well, and you're kind of speaking to the modesty piece of it too, that I think is important when people start thinking about awakening or waking up or having these waking up experiences. That it's kind of like what Joel was saying. It's like the instinct is like bigger, 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 bigger.
Right.
When it's a little bit more simpler and concentrated. It's discrete.
Right. It's more about discretion.
And like simple means like the emergent of complexity, which is like when you think about developmental levels, it doesn't necessarily mean that me as a person in my entirety is at a certain stage of development. It may be that a certain line of my intelligence is at a certain place versus others. It tends to be that our cognitive intelligence tends to be a little bit further, which is why like when someone might talk about spiral dynamics, they might say that they're 2 stages ahead because really mentally they might be. They might be having a mental awareness of a state that they may have had a bunch of awakening states cognitively in those moments, but they may not have had embodied physical kinesthetic experiences in those moments.
Because our brains go faster than our bodies.
And maybe further down, there might be not tapping into an existential intelligence as much and thinking about the meaning of our lives and all of that stuff. Right. So that's what I mean with awakening is awakening to the fact that it's a little bit of peace from our minds because the mind gets really cluttered and it tries to make things simple. It's like, in the moments where I'm just like, I literally cannot think about anything outside of this room right now. It's like the simplest experience where I'm navigating a lot of complexity in my mind as I'm trying to communicate these things. This is a very simple, beautiful experience that we're sharing with each other, talking about this.
Yeah.
And like, for me, this is a consistent wake up spiritual experience to be doing this stuff. And for others, it's like starting to access that through consistent mindfulness work, getting present to not only having to rely on peak experiences, like things like performance or orgasms or group singing or anything that will apply enough pressure for you to have a peak experience, but then you can start to work on the quote unquote mindfulness work to be able to calm the mind, to be able to focus, to be able to bring those experiences with you in more cases, as opposed to relying on external world things to make those experiences happen.
Yeah. I think when a person experiences what you're talking about, I think, at least for me, a byproduct is almost always modesty. Like I feel like I'm more accurately assessing something. I'm getting a real true feeling for what that is. And it almost always comes with almost like a relief.
Yeah.
Right. Like awakening means no more pretense.
Can we walk through the thing that you're talking about just for a second? So just to apply it, like if you're listening or watching along, I'm just going to kind of workshop this with Antonia here. This idea of you had to awaken to unearned status or unearned
just unearned
recognition, growth.
Yeah. Like things that I'm like, I was letting myself believe I was further along than I actually was.
Well, and I think, and the reason why I think that's particularly is relevant if you're listening or watching along is I think this might be the challenge for a lot of people to awaken to this, because I think there's this idea in the zeitgeist about this idea of unearned whatever. But I think what we're talking about is there's a meta economy and currency shift in that approval and disapproval is how we measure things now, which really skews the more primal survival level for us, because it's more of a social, let's take a social frame. So what I think I heard you
the
saying,
shadow economy around like likes.
Like likes, like you can be like, okay, I mean, I also have this idea of gained versus earned, right? You can gain a lot of followers by having something that grabs attention, but did you really earn all those followers? Did you actually add value to the world or just grab their attention? It was so easy with the technology and the leverage of that to get a bunch of likes and feedback like, oh, you've done well. Like you might interpret that as the self to say, oh, look how awesome I am and how well I've done because this many people follow me or this many people like me. Or, you know, I was on Instagram, I posted a cool picture of myself doing this extreme thing. I got attention and it boosted me up. What I think you're saying is there might be a moment in someone's life that awakens that like, oh, like I'm valuing myself in this way and maybe I'm not actually at that level. Maybe I've got a synthesized view of where I'm actually at. I'm awakening to, okay, where am I actually, this modesty idea, where am I actually at in my life? Because I feel boosted by all these, you know, maybe on a dating app and there's a bunch of people that have like swiped whichever way you're supposed to swipe. I'm bearing my age and station of life. I don't know which direction, up or down or right, left corner. But like I get a lot of accolades or feedback on my value in the sexual marketplace. And so I think, oh man, I've got, you know, because of that, the app maybe skews it in my favor because of the pictures I choose or the description or something like that. Somebody might say.
So I must be a good partner.
Yeah. So you have this, we have elevated. Validation. So I think what we're also awakening to is kind of this awakening to modesty of, okay, like a measuring tool of, okay, where am I actually at in my life? And again, we're subjectively judging it from our own viewpoints. But we're using other people for feedback. And it's so easy to skew that and think that we're maybe further along. And then let's say somebody that does, let's say they put themselves in a position where they're a personal growth expert and they've talked about something or they're a type expert, but then they have to go into a context where they have to show, they can't curate it and edit the video carefully and cut out all the, like the silly things and bear out the fact they may not actually know what they're talking about as much. And then they have to go like give a live talk on a stage and now they're terrified. They can't show up to the world because they've never had that moment to wake up to themselves like, oh, this is where I actually am in my life. And that moment of having to step on that stage probably is a really big wake up moment, right? Oh man, I've always curated what I did through video all this time. Now I've got to get up and deliver dynamically. I've got to really show what I know. And you all of a sudden realize all those likes, all those accolades, all those comments, all that curation you had. Again, I'm using it as an example. I'm not trying to pick on an influencer or any kind of person that would put themselves out in that fashion. It's just my world that I live in. So that's why I'm choosing it. But then it's like, it's a real profound knowledge. Like, okay, this is where I actually am. This is where I need to be. Is that kind of what we're talking about in your example? Is that a good way to workshop through it?
Yeah. And what has been earned and what wasn't. Like in the situation where a person did get a bunch of, say, subscribers or a bunch of likes or a bunch of shares or whatever, they did earn the ability to get likes. They earned that, right? Whether they gamed it or they figured out, you know, I mean, sometimes you just luck out. Honestly, there's a fair bit of luck in some of this and timing, but they, you know, they were opportunistic and they jumped on it at the right time. So to some extent they did earn that too, right? They could have just sat back and done nothing. So there is some earning, but I think for me, it was the awareness that sometimes I glob these things together, right? I conflate things. Almost like a bill that has like a bunch of stuff in it. It's like, if we pass this, then we're passing it all, right? And it's like, well, maybe we should create some distinctions around these things because they might not actually be related. So it's a matter of what was earned, what did I actually do, and what didn't I earn that I'm taking credit for. And so it's not to say that you didn't earn any of it. It's to say, show some discretion around what was earned and what still needs to be focused on. And those are opportunities we talked about in last episode. Growth is readiness plus pressure. Right. And I think that's a really good framework. I'm just officially using it from this point on. And so what waking up does is I think it makes you aware of those moments so you don't make lateral moves, or it gives you more opportunities so that when pressure and readiness are there, right, when they combine, you just happen to have that moment, awareness or awakening allows you to know what direction to point it in. Because you might have pressure and readiness, but kind of not know what to do with it. Right. It's like, I think I need to be doing this thing. When you have an awakening, you go, I need to apply it to this. And this will be my highest gain.
It's quite literally when we dream, it's like you can practice the idea of lucid dreaming, but you still have to earn that. You still have to work towards being able to do that. But most of the time when many of us dream, it's like watching a movie unfold and something's just happening. But then we wake up and like we actually have to make choices. And there's a beautiful thing to be able to actually literally wake up as a person, that you can get up and feed yourself and walk around your house naked if you want to, or like whatever the case may be, to make those choices to now actually have sovereignty in your life. that the dreams didn't provide. You can have a nightmare and you can also have a beautiful dream and want to stay asleep, but you could also have a nightmare anytime you go to sleep. Like, you just don't know what you're going to come into the experience of. Things are just happening to you. And now you wake up to the opportunity to create a reality and experience a reality where you can make things happen for yourself. So you're both talking about this idea of awakening to something. And the truth is, while the awakening experience itself might be exciting, if you're having gratitude for what the awakening brings you to, if you wake up next to a beautiful woman, you're like, this is great. I really like waking up, and having this experience of waking up to something positive. But to wake up means now that there's things to deal with, which essentially leads us into what we're going to talk about in the next episode, which is this cleaning up idea that, like, now that we're awake, there's things that we see that we couldn't see before, and now we have to deal with.
And that's an metaphor, because sometimes we fall back asleep.
And sometimes we really want to.
Yeah, exactly. And so then waking up is also, it brings along with it responsibility. And I think, we talk about, a long time ago, we did a podcast on the drama triangle and then the empowerment dynamic, which takes these positions of, these aren't the drama triangles monikers, but I choose them because they're easier to remember. Which is, it's a worldview where you funnel everything into victim, villain, and hero. So in any given situation, somebody's occupying the position of hero, saving the day, a victim that the hero is saving, and a villain that has put the victim in that situation.
Yeah.
And the empowerment dynamic says, well, you can keep all three of those slots. You just change it from villain to challenger, victim to creator, and hero to coach. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that a big part of the awakening process is changing our position to a more empowered frame, going like, I might not be a victim. I actually might be a creator. I might be able to do something. Now, it might be very difficult, right? And there might be a lot of steps to it. And that might be why it's easier for me to think of myself as a victim to the world. But the truth is that there are things I can do. And the awakening is, what can I do? What are the areas and opportunities that I can do something about my life?
Yeah, hard work comes on the other side of it. And it's really easy to, again, create avoidances to, get temporary chemical hits of something, but not actually bring physical material experience into the world where we actually make some sort of impact in our environment or in our lives or with people around us.
Yeah. So that makes me think of LSD. You said chemicals. Just jerk the wheel.
Sure.
It's going to relate.
Great.
I promise, or at least I hope so. So there's technology like psychedelics, for example, maybe even exposure to concepts on the internet at a young age. But like I've known people in real life that have had experience, for example, with psychedelics, something like LSD, where, if you have experience with psychedelics, it's a very profound, it's literally a trip. It's a transportation experience. You go into an altered state, chemically altered state, and you have an experience. It's very profound, very personal. And often people come back reporting saying they saw awakening moments of what's possible. They saw, I saw the source code, fill in the blank. There's a whole range of experience people have. And I've noticed that people that do something like LSD or maybe magic mushrooms, psychedelic, in their teen years, sometimes it like wakes them up too early, too soon. And I was actually reflecting on this because the last episode we talked about growing up, and I said, that feels out of order. It feels like you have to awaken to what's possible first, and then you grow up after you're awakened to it. But really, I think it is in the proper order, because you almost have to have a platform, a substrate to build the waking up experiences off of. If you have an experience of waking up to something, I think too early, premature waking up, I often wonder if there's a little bit of a challenge that happens there. And I think of one of my favorite bands is the Grateful Dead. I love listening to their music, and I think they have a great way of creating experience, a social experience for people. And I love their music, but I know their lives, and I know how it all ended up for them, and especially two of the members passed away, I think at this point, at the time of this recording, because I think they never grew up. Now it was, I think Pigpen was one of the early band members to pass away in like the 1970s. And then Jerry Garcia himself passed away. I think he actually kind of took himself out because I think he was faced with a moment of having to grow up and own some more things and like mature. and he just absolutely refused.
Yeah.
You could debate this if you're a Grateful Dead, if you're a Deadhead fan or whatever. I think he absolutely refused. And I think he was confronted with this growing influence and this growing operation that he had to grow up to be able to manage. And he basically unconsciously said, I'd rather die than do that. And ended up like taking himself out through poor health and poor management. So I see that as a
station hot dogs, basically.
I see a cautionary tale. I think he went to like some kind of like diabetes shock because he wasn't taking care of his health at all. Like he was on so many drugs and he was eating terribly. And to me, I'm like, they're the Grateful Dead. They were dropping like LSD acid trips like all the time. Like that was their lifestyle. And they would say our success was because we didn't have we dissolved our egos and we were able to cooperate and grow and perform and all of this. And I'm like, yeah, but you never matured. You're still kind of like where you were back then. And yeah, you have all these waking up experiences, but that's not enough. Like waking up is not enough. Or that would have just taken care of itself. But I think you had a lot of challenges in that. So I'm realizing too, especially young people now have access to a lot of social technologies, chemical technologies like, certain psychedelics are becoming legalized or decriminalized places. I think marijuana or cannabis is available for most people right now to have like different experiences.
And just the access to social technologies like psychology and understanding why the mind does what it does.
Exactly. We were talking to Darren on a few episodes ago about business. And he's like, why the stock market doesn't crash in the same way is we have perfect information. We know the cycles of economics and we kind of understand how that works now. So people don't panic and run on the banks and like try to withdraw their money and stuff.
Right.
So it's like, we know more. So we're having these enlightened, like on a group scale, we're like, can't help it. We're awakening to other concepts and possibilities. And I think so it's not always that waking up is a good, it's a good thing. How do I say it? It's not always the pursuit of it that we should be focused on. It is something that happens, and it's still with wisdom and, judicious attunement.
Yeah.
We can't just wildly say, oh, wake up. That's what I need to do. I just want to bring that up too, because I think that's something that like a lot of young people are probably working through.
Right. I mean, like growth within a level of development.
Yeah.
Like there's a fullness of that experience. It's like navigate that terrain as much as possible.
Yes.
And sometimes we get kind of jerked into the next level, or we have traumatic experiences, or we have something happen that thrusts us into having to think very differently than we are now. And that can be too soon. I mean, that's the idea of shadow work, is you go back through earlier levels of your development and you're doing a lot of cleanup work and you're like, what did I miss? Or what did I collect that I didn't see that I collected? What did I learn from a level of experience that I didn't? It wasn't aware that I took on, that became like a shadow representation of myself, something that I'm now unconsciously doing, even though I was able to move forward. You can go through levels, not necessarily consciously having graduated from that level. There could be a lot of material in there that propelled you that wasn't conscious. And I mean, you can have these, whenever you have a peak experience, like a really big peak experience, like maybe a spiritual awakening kind of experience, like depth meditation or a highly traumatic experience, that you can awaken to your level of development. So we talked about me, we, everybody as kind of like the main three pillars to what to think about how our development shifts. If you wake up in a me experience, you could very well see yourself as the Messiah. And that propels you to be the savior of the planet, or be the person that is everyone serves you, that kind of thing. Or if you wake up to a we center of development, it's like our people are the people that are supposed to be running the planet. Everyone else are infidels they're not a part of it. It's an extreme. It becomes an extreme of that worldview. Yeah. Us versus them. Or everyone needs to be hyper rational, like whatever the case may be, but you will awaken to that level of development. So sometimes it happens accidentally and traumatically, but other times it's like, you might just need to get a job. Like, you might need to, like, that might be the next thing you need to do. It's not taking more drugs. It's not having more satisfaction, mental experiences, but like, you might need to be responsible. Yeah. You might need to go do whatever the next grow up thing is and let go of trying to have this like oneness with the universe experience when, the circumstance is not really enabling or allowing you to do that responsibly and well and properly in a way that's good for you and the people around you.
Quickly, I know you want to say something, but like talk about bypass. Oh, getting a job. I know I'll go become more spiritually minded. And like, that's a bypass if that's what you need. to just go get that day job and you go and you become the spiritual whatever. It's like maybe you're bypassing the very fundamental thing that you need to do to grow to enable that waking up experience to happen in a better way.
Yeah, maybe you need to clean up your bedroom and take a shower.
Yes. And that's what I think a lot of, I know I need to do that in my life a lot more.
I mean, respectfully.
Thank you, Christian. I need to go do that next.
Well, and there's a couple things coming up for me. The first one is that for me, when I feel like I've truly woken up to something, if it doesn't come along with a sense of modesty, then it doesn't feel complete. And the idea of I'm the Messiah or I'm the savior or my group, my demographic should be running everything. That's a lack of modesty. And sometimes you just got to go get a job. Well, I'm too good for that. That's a waste of my time. I hear a lot of young people be like, a day job is a waste of my time. And I'm like, well, only if you think you're too good for it. Because remember, having a day job replaces hunting and gathering or being a peasant farmer. So the modern world makes us nice and, like I think we overvalue our time, honestly. Like I'm too good for that. And it's like, well, let me tell you what a day job will do. It'll force you to be consistent about something. It'll force you to watch yourself do something that isn't that pleasant in order to subsist, to not be subsidized by others, but to be the person who earns your own keep. In times past, you would have been, felling creatures. You would have been killing creatures and gutting them. You don't have to do that anymore, right? Would that have been a waste of your time? Or you would have had to have done grueling, backbreaking labor as a peasant farmer. Would that have been a waste of your time? But for some reason, like being able to sit in a chair and do data entry, that's a waste of my time. Now, to be fair, it probably actually would have been more satisfying because you've been physical, right? And a lot of us are lacking physicality. But a day job will watch you basically do what farmers watch themselves do, which is take care of their own needs. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is if you do it well, you'll be able to watch yourself do something well, right? And then you'll gain self-confidence and self-esteem through it. So it's not a waste of your time. And why is your time so valuable that you don't have to, that you're one of the only people who shouldn't have to feed yourself and live off of your own, labor. And so I think that waking up piece without the growing up piece, I think it gives us airs. It makes us really arrogant. And I remember somebody who we were familiar with quite a long time ago, who was a young gentleman, lived with his parents, who basically meditated 8 to 10 hours a day. And there was something that person was tapped into. I can't deny that they were clearly tapped into an energy that you can only get to if you're doing 8 to 10 hours of meditation every day.
They had a waking up experience and they kept going that route.
They just kept going, right? And their parents were subsidizing it. Right? Like somebody had to subsidize this experience for this person.
Right.
And they were too young to ask other people to do that for them because they were able-bodied.
Right. There was no growth pressure.
No growth pressure at all. So they weren't growing. They were just staying in this like meditative state all the time. And that's the addiction you talk about. Like that can be just as addictive. So I think what's really important about having the platform of Grow Up is it reminds you that you aren't special, right? Like you need to be you need to be earning your keep, right? There are things that you can't, like a person in that state might say, I've grown beyond needing a job, and that is unearned, right? Like really, what was the passage of, what were all the things you did to earn not having to work anymore, right? So I think I appreciate you bringing that up again, because the platform of Grow Up is so crucial, and all this wake up without Grow Up is just rife with spiritual bypasses. And as we mentioned before, lateral moves.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else around access points or how we can attune this before we start to land the plane on this episode?
I mean, we mentioned meditation and mindfulness. That's usually what a lot of people end up going to when they get to a certain stage of development. But like that humility piece is so important. It's like really paying attention to within yourself, or like if you're parenting children, it's like if they are not in a place where they can be humble about who they are and about their experience, then giving them spiritual mindfulness experiences is not necessarily the answer. And also mindfulness can be abused as like a behavioral control mechanism. It's not about making you a more well-behaved person. It's about giving a little bit of clarity to your mind. It's about making things a little bit more simple. And also the experience of now being able to explore your mind, which has repressions in there. It has, things that you can review within your dreams, and your unconscious is starting to share ideas with you, and you're able to start to face yourself, which I think is really getting into what the next episode will be.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about cleanup on the next episode. How do you give us a preview? When we say cleanup, what are we actually talking about here? Well,
if meditation is the access point to waking up, or an access point to waking up, then cleaning up is what you do while you're awake. Okay. And that's why people want to go back to sleep. It's like, oh no, this whole being awake was interesting. It was an exciting moment of lucidity, but now I have to do things while I'm here. I have to explore my inner terrain. It's like, there's uncomfortable stuff in there. Am I a bad person? What does that mean to be a bad person? Do I have to unravel my relationship to my past religion? We were talking about that we experience, where sometimes people have stuff in there that they don't want to approach again, or in their me experience of owning the ego parts of themselves of I just want to make a mess, and they don't let themselves make a mess. So it's reviewing shadow material and re-examining things. It's taking the ego, which I see as the junction point between persona and shadow. And we'll explain what those things are, but it's the things that we determine in ourselves are good or bad, and sort of reworking through self-analysis, what is actually good or bad? And especially based on that humility piece. If I'm developing humility, I need less external pressure, because I can apply my own internal pressure more appropriately. Yeah. So I can better tune to, what is good or bad, or what is ethical with myself, as opposed to needing external institutions to do that for me.
That's great. Okay. So next week on the episode, we're going to talk about this idea of cleaning up. And we also have one about growing up after that, or showing up after that.
Yep.
So just tune into this. If you're listening or watching along, you're the fourth person in this conversation. You haven't had a microphone, but we want to hear from you. As you think about waking up, as you think about this experience, come over underneath this episode at personalityhacker.com. Leave a comment, ask a question, or share your story. Do you have a story of a waking up moment where you were aware of something you weren't aware of before? You had an enlightened moment, a Damascene moment, oh, I see the light. It could be in really small things. I think mine wasn't super profound. I think it will have a profound impact, but it wasn't like I was, doing a psychedelic and deep meditation work. I was in that experience of coaching, helping people. And I was like, oh man, my body's going to be really important for this. It was this moment. Sometimes they happen as little flashes. Sometimes they're bigger insights, and you see a bigger picture emerge. So tune into this for yourself. And we'd like to hear from you. What's coming up as we talk about this concept of waking up? Is it something you've never really had an experience with? Maybe you did it really early in your life, and now you're kind of struggling, oh man, I've seen too much. I wish I don't know everything I know. Where are you at in this entire process of waking up? I'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you. Again, make your voice heard over at personalityhacker.com.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating review for us on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. And I read every single review. So ratings are nice, but reviews are even nicer. Ooh. If you'd like to leave one for us. You could be watching us on YouTube right now, because we have a video version of this podcast. You can subscribe, and hit the bell that lets you know when a new episode comes out. And you might be part of our Quest group that is all just about to discuss this episode in just a couple minutes. I say to myself in the future. So if you are a part of Quest, welcome. And we'll get to talking about this episode in just a moment. Yep. We also have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon and on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot.
Yeah, I'll just reference back to Personality Quest. I think this is a great way to take some of the concepts we talk about in this podcast. We watch it together as a community. Then we go into a private membership Zoom call we call Personality Quest. We find access points for ourselves. We find ways to apply it to ourselves, the things we talk about. And then we give everybody a personality quest for the week. It's a challenge to go test your mettle in the real world, applying something in the real world, then coming back with that learning and then connecting again. We've got small groups where we gather people. Everybody gets to share in small groups of 3 or 4 people. And we have a broader community gathering where we get to share in more of a public forum. And we give out those quests. Christian, you're part of them. Currently, they're on Sundays at the time of this recording. And we like this weekly cadence of gathering and going out in the real world, testing our mettle, testing what we know and how we show up. as a community of like minds. So go over to personalityhacker.com/quest. Join the membership. Be a part of this program. We really want to make this come alive in your life, and we'd love to have you part of it. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
My name is Christian Rivera.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.